Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to begin starting the presentation. As you saw in the beginning, we talked about creating the volumes in the volume groups. So let's start off with this first one that we have. I want to let everybody know that I do have two DSS systems up right now. And as you can see, I don't have a unit right here. I don't have a volume group. And over on this unit, I do. So let's talk about how I create a volume group. If we take a look at DSS-1, the data storage server on here on the left, I have no groups. So what I want to do is I'm going to create two of them. One, I'm going to use the three-way array controller. And I had it set up previously, but for many of you that aren't familiar with the three-way, what you would do is you go to Setup, and you would go to Hardware RAID. And here you have the management button to access it. Now if you notice, there's the LSI array controller here on the left as well. So let's take a look at what we have here. I have placed two drives in the enclosure that I have that I can create a RAID array from that LSI RAID controller. So for our first task, we're going to go ahead and create it from the three-way. So I'll just start up brand new so you can see it. Let's just go back into Setup, Hardware Array Units, and click on the 3DM tool. And what this will do is bring you up into a username and password to allow you to create the units. Typically go right into the maintenance under management. And here are my disks. Now, when we talk about creating units and why would you have more than one volume group, in many instances, you may have tiered storage in such a way that you may want preferably your SAS drives, as what I have here on the Seagates. These are SAS drives, they're the 15Ks, that you may want to create a volume group for your databases. Or I/O that is needing higher I/Os than just the SATA drives. You may want to create it with a RAID 10. Well, for this purpose, what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and create for these two drives. And actually, we'll go 3 here, because then we'll create a dynamic unit on the other SAS drives to show a demonstration of the dynamic unit creation. So if I take this and I'm going to create a unit, and for this purpose I'm going to use the write cache. It's very important to use write cache for performance reasons. Always have a battery backup unit attached to the RAID controller. I'm going to go for performance. And of course we'll create that RAID. And now you see that it's going to go ahead and load, and we can go over to the DSS side and see that we should see a 130 gig available RAID array. So we'll go into the DSS and go to Configuration, Volume Manager, Volume Groups, and there's our unit to be able to do our volume group that is called a unit S00. So that's the first one. So let's create another one, and you'll see it as S001. Now keep in mind, let's say I have a database for, let's say, SQL or even for Exchange, and I need a really performance value out of the volume group, so I created a unit with the SAS drives. So now, when let's say I wanted something a little bit more for just file recovery or file retrieval or even a repository for your data, I'm going to use the SATA drives. So let's go back to the three-way array controller. And here you'll see that I have some SATA drives here. They're about 1 terabyte each. And I'm just going to create just a RAID 0 again, just for performance reasons, just to be able to show this quickly into the webinar, because I don't want to do a RAID 5 or RAID 10 yet. I want to set it for performance. And of course, at three-way, many RAID controllers will complain that if you're setting for write cache to utilize a battery backup unit, for obviously reasons that if you were to, let's say, system shutdown, that you can have loss of data. So now I have two RAID arrays. One's a RAID 5 and one is a RAID 0. Let's go back to the DSS. And you can see instantly it updates very fast on our two volumes that we've created. So you can see that the unit S001 is the one we just recreated, and that's with the SATA drives. So I may want to use this for, let's say, some of my NAS shares, possibly for some light end iSCSI, and typically you can add many volume groups. So it's not just this unit S00 and that's the last capability you could do. We can even add another one. Actually, let's go ahead and use the LSI on this time. So we'll go to Setup, Hardware RAID, and select LZ0. So the LSI is the LSI RAID controller 0. So you can have many RAID controllers in here for the LSI. And we'll just go ahead and select these two right here. Keep in mind it'll work with SCSI drives. We will work with SATA drives, SAS drives, SSDs. Typically we don't see too many SCSI and IDEs because of the legacy value that they have. And for this purpose, we'll just go ahead and create the disk cache policy. We'll enable that. We'll do a fast initialization. And we'll enable the cache. We'll go cached, read policy, adaptive, and write back. And let's go ahead and apply that. Okay, so now on the left, you see our new RAID array that was created in LSI. It's a logical disk, 0. We have our parameters here. You can change these parameters on the fly and just hit apply, and they'll take an effect as soon as you hit that apply button to the RAID array. So here's our RAID information, and now we should be able to see in our configuration volume manager in our volume groups and update the scan, and we will see later on that the S002 will be updated. At this point, all you have to do is when you have, and there it is, let it refresh. There we go. Now, if I wanted to enable this unit, I can do so just by clicking once on it. And here, you can really rename it. You can say DSS, let's say for DSS underscore SAS. And so now it's going to create a volume group on the left side. After it formats it, it's going to create it as the DSS underscore SAS. So that way I have some indication of what is that volume group, what's its purpose. And so this identifies it as clearly that I'm using it for a little bit more performance values than the SATA drives, as you can see, is we put on there for 1.8 terabytes. And now let's go ahead, while that's formatting, we can go ahead and create one for a dynamic unit. There is a webinar that I talk about what are dynamic units used for. So the dynamic units are for our backup purposes. So you would use that as virtualizing it like a tape library. So you can carve out many different tapes from the dynamic unit. So here, let's decide to take this 300 gig approximately volume that we've created, and we're going to create a new dynamic unit. Again, you can create many dynamic units. They can also be created from even an iSCSI target. So you could use the built-in initiator from the DSS. So we'll go ahead and click on that. Now the only one we have left is basically we can call that or just a file retrieval area, which will be the unit S001, which are the SATA drives that we've created from. So here on the left you're going to see DSS SAS in the dynamic unit, and let's go ahead and create the next one, and we'll call this DSS underscore SATA. And once that completes, then we'll have our full listing. Now, when we've completed this process, what I want to show you is a lot of questions we get. Well, how do you delete it? Why can't we delete it from the GUI? We really don't want you to delete it from the GUI. We've had a lot of questions based on why can't we just have an X mark or a mark right next to the status of the volume, or even to underneath the unit manager, some notation of to be able to delete the volume. We want to make it as very difficult for you to delete the volume, due because we believe that data, security, and being able to keep data intact without any accidental, let's say, mouse clicks or maybe some more extra procedures that are involved to prevent you from doing that, kind of saves your data. So this is why we don't have it in here. So the question would be, well, how would you delete your volume group? Let's say you had an older volume group, S000, and you'd like to end of life that. You've already copied your data, or you used the built-in data replication, or you used our backup function to back up your data onto S001, and you really don't need S000. Well, you can actually do that. So this is where the switching happens, this is where the delete of the volume groups happen, and let's go into it. But first, what I'd like to show you, if we're going to do this, is that if I were to, let's say, this is DSS SATA is going to be my newly implemented larger capacity, and I'm no longer needing DSS_SAS. So what I want to show you that if we create a NAS volume, or any volume for that fact, iSCSI or fiber channel, let's just go ahead and put 10 gig in here. Click apply. And currently right now, if you notice, each of the volume groups has a 4 gig swap, and it's also 4 gig for reserve for system. So you don't have to create it. It's automatically done with the latest version of DSS v6 on build 5217. Now, if we were to take the SAS, and this is our default because it was the first one that was created. So here again, it creates the swap and also creates the reserve for system. Now, if I decide at some point in time, like we talked about, that I'd like to delete the DSS SAS or any volume, let's go ahead and demonstrate that. Now, what I'd like to do before we do is use this volume on the other system, which is 149 gig, and let's delete that one. Because what I want to show you is that I want to be able to switch SAS to SATA and let SATA be the default volume group. At the same time, I want to show that I can delete this volume. So this will teach you how to delete volume groups, teach you also how to switch volume groups. One of the first things you want to do to be able, you want to get to console. And the remote console access is a very unique feature of the DSS v6 because a lot of us understand that DSS is a server. And it may be somewhere across the building. And you don't have time to go call somebody up or access it by physically walking to that building. So this remote console access allows you to access the console screen to delete the volume groups, or even logical volumes for that fact. Here you want to be able to enable the remote console access. For this purpose, I'm not going to put an allow IP address. So I'm just going to leave it blank, which means it's wide open. And of course, a 5-character password. I've set it on for both of them. Then I'm going to use Putty. Now, if any time you need some questions about any feature of our products, if you click on the question mark, you'll see that we have a screen here that talks specifically about details about that specific feature. So you may want to reference to any of one of these. If you want to download Putty, you can just click on Putty. And then, of course, it brings you to a downloadable window where you can download Putty. All right, let's go ahead and load up Putty. So let's go ahead and bring this down. And here we have Putty. So we're going to delete a volume group that was created on DSS2. Let's go ahead and load it up. And in Putty, you want to make sure that you have the IP address or the host name. And then set it for the default password of port 22,222. Now you can change this in the GUI. So if I were to go back, I could change this to 22,223 or 4, depending upon if you have many of them, and or you need to run NAT, network address translation, for outside access. Let's go ahead and load it up. Now, our default username is going to be CLI, and then of course the password we just set for 12345. You can change the password for any needs in any way you want. Let's blow this up so everybody can see it larger. There we go. Where I want to be, if I wanted to delete this volume group, is Control-Alt-X, which means for extended tools. By the way, I'm going to back out for a second and show you that if you have difficulties with knowing where and what tools to use, just use the F1 key. The F1 key brings up the menu of all the commands. So here you can research for all the ones that you might need access to. So for this one, you can see that the Control-Alt-X right here is to run the extended tools. So let's go ahead and run Control-Alt-X. And of course, we give you notation that some of these tools in the extended tools are very dangerous. We do ask you to enter the GUI password. So this is the administrative password, the full access password. Now you see I have a bunch of listings that I can use. Now, all the way down the bottom, you'll see to delete contents of units. Once I do this, keep in mind that the data will be lost. We've had several people say, well, how can I delete the volume groups? But we really want to make sure that you understand that the data will be gone forever. So please be aware of this. So you're going to delete the contents of units. This, by the way, will restart the system. So bear in mind, if you have more than one volume group, but you really need to delete the other volume group, keep in mind that this is going to cause a restart. Or do it during maintenance hours, off hours, or weekend time frames. So I'm going to use a space bar. That way it denotes the S00 that I would like to delete. And here again, once we present the message to you, we tell you to pay special attention. All the data on the unit will be lost. And any volume groups and logical volumes totally will be gone. So there's no recovery at this point. Once we state yes, then apparently at this point in time, we're in the volume group manager. We're about ready to delete it. We wipe it out clean. And of course, it's going to present with a message stating that please restart the system momentarily once it's complete. And there's your message. At this point, when you press enter, the system will reboot. If you leave this up, it will not reboot on its own. So you could do this, let's say, after business hours to restart the system. And at this point, it's going to close the connection. Now, what's going to happen is that on the DSS2, we deleted that volume. Of course, the system is rebooting, so we won't be able to have access to it. But that volume unit S000 will no longer be available. Okay, so now let's go back over to DSS1. We talked about the creating multiple volume groups. And again, you can have as many volume groups as you wish. Typically, for management reasons, I wouldn't put more than 10 or even 12. That's a lot of volume groups. You might have specific reasons of creating maybe multiple dynamic units for your backups. Maybe dynamic 000 for your full backups, dynamic 001 for incrementals, or maybe differentials. You may have other reasons. Maybe you want to replicate dynamic unit. Yes, you can do that. How? Let's say I were to use the DSS iSCSI auto failover, and I present the target. Let's say a 16 terabyte target to DSS v6. I'm replicating it. I use a 10 gig E between them. Then I take another DSS system, such as this, create a dynamic unit, because I'm going to use the built-in iSCSI initiator with DSS. Where is the built-in iSCSI initiator? Go to Setup, iSCSI initiator, and here you would put the IP address of the other DSS v6 or the virtual IP address that you're using it for the auto failover. That way, if server A, which is on the dynamic unit that you've created that iSCSI target, you can go ahead and create that target for it to be used as a dynamic unit, thus used for your virtual tape library. So it's useful to use the dynamic unit for backups. Now, we talked about if I were to have, let's say, our default volume group that we have right now, which is DSS SAS. Here you'll see that we have no volume groups, logical volumes. Of course, we can add them. So let's go ahead and add an iSCSI logical volume, because what we're going to do is we're going to switch this, and we're going to let it restart. So we'll go ahead and just create a simple 10 gig. Give it a second here. And now we have our iSCSI volume. And on our DSS SATA, we should have our NAS. Now let's go ahead and switch them. So let's pretend that the DSS_SAS we want to be able to switch. And there's a reason why we might. Could be that we are decommissioning it, A. B, we could be that we know we have an issue with the DSS SAS and we're somehow not able to diagnose the problem. So let's go ahead and bring up Putty. And let's close out this connection. There we go. Bring up the screen. Now we need to go to Control-Alt-X, which is the extended tools. And here's where we want to select the default volume group. Now again, when we select the default volume group, all it's doing is going to reboot. It's going to switch to the volume group that we wish to select from. So here's the listings that we have to select the DSS volume group. We're going to set the DSS_SATA to be our default. And of course, this operation means that it's going to be restarted. Please note that current settings and configuration will not be moved to the new default volume group. Please save and download your current server settings from your desktop. So here you would go to Maintenance Miscellaneous, Save Settings. After setting the new default volume group, you can easily restore them via the WebGUI Maintenance Miscellaneous Restore. And of course, it saves it as a settings.cnf file. So let's go ahead and get this process. So we want to reboot it. And of course, it reboots automatically. So please bear that in mind as the system does reboot. All right, we'll give that a second to reboot so we can bring it back up. And then let's go ahead and bring up the DSS2. Now remember, we deleted this volume group. It was about 140 gig. Now it's restarted. And let's verify. So we go to Configuration, Volume Groups, and now the available unit is ready. Here we can delete it, remove it, add other volume groups, or go ahead and assign it as a default volume group. So that is the process of deleting volume groups. It will do a restart. So if you have connected users, you want to be careful of that. Remember in the other message that we had that the Putty stated that you needed to make sure that you should save your settings in maintenance and miscellaneous. If you're going to switch to another volume group, you're going to need to restore your settings. So before you switch, you want to make sure that you save your settings in maintenance miscellaneous, as it stated. Here's where this is located. If you go to maintenance, let's go ahead and create a volume. Get that started so you can see this. And once this is completed, then of course you can pretty much go ahead and start your maintenance miscellaneous to save your settings. Because you've got to keep in mind that when you're saving the settings are stored where you installed the DSS v6 onto, whether it be a DOM, whether it be on a RAID 1 mirror for 2 drives connected to a motherboard, whether it be on the RAID array, a SATA DOM. It won't store it on a CD-ROM for obvious reasons, but you will be able to save your settings on that location. For the configuration, anything that resides here in the configuration of the volume manager, NAS settings, It has resources, the target manager for iSCSI and for fiber channel. That is stored on the system partition, which is a virtual partition reserved for the system where the volume is residing at, such as your RAID array. And this is a reason it's very important because can you imagine if both the settings and configuration were both stored in the same location? You would lose everything. So this helps you to prevent a single point of failure where your settings are at. So now we can go to maintenance, then miscellaneous. And here's what we were talking about before. You should do this regardless of a lot of this process, even if you're updating by automatically we create it, but for any reasons, you should always do this before you switch your default volume group. So we're just going to go setup and configuration, and of course this setup talks about everything in the setup, and the configuration talks about everything under the configuration tab. Settings is stored in the DSS where it is installed, such as a DOM, SATA DOM, hard drive, your RAID array, and configuration is installed on the virtual partition reserved for system on your volume array. Okay, save locally and download. Locally means onto the DOM itself, and then of course do apply, which means the download to or save locally to your system. So here's the file that we're talking about, and the settings.cnf file. You won't be able to open up this file. You can only apply it and store it from here. If you ever needed to restore that file, you can just go to Browse, upload it, and then it will restore your settings. And you'll be able to access some of your previous configurations from your switching of the default volume group. Okay, let's see if the DSS1 has booted now. Looks like it hasn't, so we'll give it a few seconds more because we do have a few topics to talk about. When we talked about the switching of your default volume groups for troubleshooting, I want to bring it to your attention that the reason why this was developed is because we saw in the past where customers, let's go ahead and blow the screen up, we had customers where there was volumes that something happened in their volume, either overheat usage and the volume is damaged physically, or their RAID array had faulty issues because of a RAID controller issue, whatever it may be. Typically what happens is that you need a tool to diagnose what's going on. So this is the reason why you would want to add another volume group that you can boot off as your default volume group. Many times you can just add a drive in to be able to boot off of it and force it to be the default volume group, so you can work off the main volume group by switching it. Now what happens is that we've seen that it kind of array will boot, DSS will boot. At that time around 59% it'll start hanging. And so it prevents the DSS v6 to fully load because of RAID array issues, whatever it may be. So what we've decided to do is we put in the latest release, actually a couple releases before this, is to have a rescue mode feature that we placed in there. So when you run the system, the DSS, you boot it up in rescue mode, and you can add the proper parameter to the kernel command line. So this is where you would select right before you go right into software installer. Right after that, you want to do this right in that section. So this can be done while the system is booting, and then you follow the steps below. So you reboot the system. While the system is booting, press the tab key on the left and select the kernel version. After this, you're going to be able to have the opportunity to type in rescue mode and then press enter key in order to run the system without the splash. Now you can also type this in. You can type rescue mode, equals no underscore mount underscore LV for logical volume. Press enter, and this will allow you to boot the system bypassing the 59% issue or the hanging issue. This will allow us to, if you need us to help you diagnose your issue, maybe there's something that we can help you with, then that'll allow you to enable the remote support service, which then allows our engineers to access your system and be able to perform some diagnostics for you. Okay, so let's check to see if DSS1 is back up. And it looks like it is. Let's go ahead and log in. And let's go now into our volume manager and volume groups. And so now the default volume group is going to be the DSS_SATA. So we can now delete the DSS_SAS because this will now be assigned as our default volume group. If we go back into the Putty session, let's go ahead and restart the session. I'm going to do Control-Alt-X, and of course the default is admin for what I'm doing. Here you can see that the default is DSS_SATA. And we can go ahead and now decommission the DSS-SAS. We can now allow to also assign that all resources, our default volume group will be the DSS_SATA. And remember, once you switch it, we want to be able to go right back into the maintenance, miscellaneous, and restore the settings.cnf file that we want to use so that we can bring all the configuration and resources back. I wanted to point out also another feature here is that let's say you wanted to delete it from the RAID array. Typically, let's give it a try and I'll show you what happens. So this is what was created from the 3-ware RAID controller. We're going to have to relog back in. Let's go ahead and stop that and go back into the setup, hardware RAID. Management and maintenance. And this is where we've created the 130 gig. This is our SAS drive. So if we wanted to remove it, we could delete the unit. And what will happen is that let's go take a look at DSS so you can experience it yourself. We'll rescan it to RAID controller as well. Now we have found no more drives or updated. Now let's go to configuration, volume manager, volume groups. And you can see it's gone now. So this is a non-destructive way to, once you've switched the volume, you can remove it and then be able to do this without rebooting the system once you've switched the volume group. So it's best recommended that way. And at this point in time, you can also create your new volume group and you can add on to the new unit. So we'll just go ahead with intelligent, we'll go with performance, we'll just do a RAID 0. We'll give it a second, and now we'll see the new volume. So what this shows you is that once you switch your default volume group, if you're decommissioning it, you can go ahead and delete it, remove it from your 3-ware RAID controller or RAID controller, access, be able to see that DSSV6 removed it, and then at the same time now makes it available. And again, you can add it as another default volume group or as another dynamic unit. So here we'll add it as another dynamic 0, 1. And then it'll update with dynamic 0, 1. That's in case of, let's say if I wanted to use SAS to be able to have my backup windows to back up a little bit faster than my bit buckets of SATA drives. So this gives you the idea of how to use your volume groups, how to remove volume groups, then also creating your volume groups, reasons why you would have more than one volume group, and switching your default volume group to another volume group, and why is that necessary in case you need to troubleshoot